The second reason that we have such expensive housing and such expensive everything is because the Prime Minister engaged in a massive orgy of money printing over the last 2 years. Now, he said that money printing wouldn't cause inflation, right? Even though that's exactly what it has done every single time it has been tried over the last roughly 3,000 years, right? Right. So here's how it worked. The Prime Minister wanted to be able to claim that he was borrowing all this money on the cheap. He loved to stand in the House and say that his debt wasn't costing any money because interest rates were so low. Well, the only reason he could borrow for next to nothing is because his central bank was creating the cash out of thin air. If it had been real lenders, they would have demanded a real rate of return on their loans. So what happened is they created something called quantitative easing. Whenever they invent new incomprehensible terminology, Mr. Speaker, you can be sure that there's something sinister behind it. And here's how it works. Very simple. The government sells bonds to lenders. Bank of Canada buys back those bonds at a higher price. The lenders love it. That's why the banks thoroughly endorse this strategy, because they made the money on the difference. Simple arbitrage. The government sells them something on a Monday and buys it back for them at a higher price on a Wednesday. Who wouldn't go for that deal? Well, unfortunately, only about 100 financial institutions are eligible to participate in it. The rest of the ordinary, hardworking Canadians who pay for it are not. But the banks and the insurance companies and other financial institutions profited off of this transaction. Now, the Bank of Canada pays for those bonds by depositing money in the accounts of those large financial institutions held on reserve at the Bank of Canada. And so those reserves skyrocketed over the last 2 years, and as the bank bought up to $400 billion of new debt. And what happened? That exploded the money supply, and more dollars chasing fewer goods reached higher prices. Much of the money then funneled into the financial system and was lent out in mortgages to wealthy investors who saw a massive expansion in the number of real estate holdings they could accumulate. Thus, housing prices went up 50% in 2 years, creating the biggest housing bubble in Canadian history. And now that the central bank is forced to raise interest rates, it risks bursting that bubble. And all the people that got on the balloon when it was on the ground floor and it went up into the sky now risk coming crashing down as that balloon is bursting. And worse than that, the Bank of Canada now has hundreds of billions of dollars of deposits that it made into the accounts that it has on its reserves of those large financial institutions. Well, what's happened to those deposits? They now bear more interest because interest rates have gone up. So the wealthy bankers that participated in this arbitrage transaction at the beginning and were paid for it by having their more money deposited into their accounts at the Bank of Canada now collect 3.75% because that is the policy rate that the bank pays. Now, what does that mean? That the central bank is now losing money for the first time in its history, and Canadian taxpayers are forced to bail them out to a tune of $4 billion every year. This entire wretched scheme, of which I warned 2 years ago, will maybe in the end amount to the single biggest wealth transfer from working class people to ultra wealthy insiders, from the have-nots to the have-yachts at any time in our history. Mr. Speaker, and now we see the painful consequences. It's not just about numbers on a ledger. It's about 1.5 million people forced to go to a food bank in a single month. It's about 1 in 5 people skipping meals or cutting portions because they can't afford their food. It's about the forthcoming winter, of which the minister spoke in metaphorical terms, who are now not going to be able to heat their homes, as the cost of home heating is expected to double or even more for those people who are on home heating oil. It is about the 35-year-old living in his parents' basement, despite the fact that he did everything we asked him to do. He got a job, he got an education, he worked hard at every day, and now he can't afford a home, which means he can't build up collateral, cannot build credit history, cannot build savings for his future, and therefore cannot start a family. In Canada, A country with among the most abundant supply of land on earth, we can't find places for people to live. These are the real-world consequences of irresponsible decisions. And meanwhile, the Prime Minister sits and smirks at the fact that he took a $6,000 a night vacation to sleep in the fanciest hotel on planet Earth, staying up in opulent hotel lobbies, jazzing it up with his friends, while people back home cannot pay the rent. Canadians are out of money, and this Prime Minister is out of touch.